stakes are going to be governed by that decision. Here's what I told the judge in court tonight. We need to create 2 piles of provisional ballots. One pile is everybody who voted before 7. The other file is everybody who voted after 7. And then once those are looked at, and for those ballots that are going to be counted, they need to be recorded separately on a V drive. They should not be put into the regular count of Election Day and early voting. And we're going to be watching to make sure that the county does it that way, because if they don't, that would be an unbelievable violation of the election. Why? Because we're going to have thousands of votes that shouldn't be in the count that are in the count. And just think about those candidates who have lost by less than a couple of thousand votes, how they might feel about the election outcome. I will tell you this, and then I'll be done. We have to have confidence in our elections. You want to make sure that every vote that is counted is legal, and we want to make sure that every vote that is ineligible to be counted is not in the count. That's critical. The way that Administrator Tatum has handled this election, there's no way to know that. There's no way to ascertain the true outcome of this vote. And so I want to ask him to publicly apologize. This isn't a partisan issue that we're raising. This is something that everyone unanimously, without regard to race, creed, color, or partisanship, should be upset about, because our democracy depends upon the integrity of the vote, so that afterwards there's a winner and there's a loser, and we can then say, maybe I didn't vote for that person, but I'm going to support them now because they're in office. We can't do that in this election because of the mishandling of the situation, and that is a loss for democracy. Thank you very much.
So now I've asked Senator Betancourt to be here. You all know him. He's been very involved in Austin with ensuring the integrity of our election process. So I'd like him to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's unconscionable to have an election in the nation's 3rd largest county that ballot paper is not at the polls when a voter comes in to vote for it. It's something that I've never seen before on a mass scale like this, and I've already had to talk to my colleagues that we're going to have to write a law that says if an election administrator has ballot paper in the warehouse and they don't deliver it to the polls, it's going to have some type of Class B, whatever, misdemeanor. Because we can't have an election process where people go to the polls and government decides they're not going to give out the ballot paper. And that's what Clifford, as an election administrator, made that decision when he tossed young staffer John Douglas out at 10:30 to not listen to the complaints of dozens of primary election judges in precincts that were pleading on the phone for an hour to try to get ballot paper to their polls so citizens can vote. It's an abject failure. And I, for one, as a former elections administrator myself, I wouldn't even show up to work the next day. I would have already turned my resignation in if I made the decision to deny thousands of voters their votes at the polls because I refused to send paper out for hours and hours and hours that the ballots could be put into machines and citizens' votes counted. So I have to come up with an unbelievable process of trying to write a law that says if an election administrator has ballots, they got to get it to the polls where people can use it. That's how bad of an issue this is. Now, let me point out that we've already had a hearing that occurred last night where the county attorney went to a judge and didn't even notify the party or the council until after the hearing was completed. They also, for the second time this week, didn't bother to notify the Attorney General, who had to take their previous order and overturn it at the Supreme Court. Now, what this means is that we have election chaos in counting. And by the way, if you don't think I'm right, look at the reconciliation form that I tweeted out on Team Betancourt. And you will see that there are different numbers being used on one simple form between the number of provisional ballots and the number of absentee ballots. And oh, by the way, the math adds up to be there's more ballots than voters, 6,400. That's a negative number. That's a red alert sign for any election administrator that they've got an election irregularity in process and they're doing nothing about it. That reconciliation was there because it was part of the voter integrity bill, SB 1, because what gets measured gets fixed. Now, so this is not some partisan fight. This is a fight about truth. Because if you can't believe in the election results, the debate will never end. And I am astonished, I am appalled. It is an abomination to have an election administrator that when the first sign of trouble, I'm out of ballots at a polling place, they don't get people in a car and get those ballots to that poll. Now, when I was an election administrator, as a voter registrar, we used to handle 50,000 phone calls and answer it in 4 seconds, and that was to the public. And if an election judge called, we answered it on the first ring. Because those primary judges of both parties, if they've got an issue, they have to be serviced by government. And they're not being. And the election administrator has already failed in his first rollout to recognize the obvious. That when you have no ballots at a poll, you have voter disenfranchisement. And it's not even a debatable argument. It's voter suppression. It's everything that everybody talks about in politics, but it happened here in the nation's third largest county. And so now we're going to have to write laws to make sure that it never happens again. Because this defies all common sense. If you have somebody employed to be an election administrator, they're supposed to do two things: get the equipment to the polls and get those ballots to the polls so the public can vote. And it's an outrage that it happened here. It's an outrage that we had a hearing last night without the Republican Party even invited till after the hearing was closed. It's an outrage that we've had 2 hearings in Harris County where we don't even have the Attorney General, even though they've asked repeatedly to be in these hearings. And we've already had one of these motions overturned at the Supreme Court, and I'm going to predict more, because we have to have an organized election process under the laws of the state of Texas. And so far, we're not doing it right. And that's the fault of the elections division, specifically the elections administrator in Harris County.
Thank you, Senator. So to the voters of Harris County, we talk a lot about voters not getting out and voting, not wanting to vote. Both parties are concerned about how do we get our base out, low voter turnout. Well, to the voters of Harris County, it is time to say enough's enough. How many election administrators do we have to go through before the county actually gets their act together and learns how to run an election appropriately, fairly, and just do their job? It is time to say we're tired of it. I don't care what party you belong to. You deserve better. You deserve to be able to go vote. Vote for the people that you're supporting, and know that when you go in there, you can cast your vote. It's going to be recorded, and it's going to be properly counted. So I'm going to open it up for a few questions, and then we'll wrap up. And I'd like to point out that Alan Vera, head of our chairman of our election integrity, our ballot security committee's here. I know he's no stranger to most of you. And you also know Chris Daniels, who is a former elected official and was one of our candidates on the ballot. Oh, questions? Yeah.
So what's your estimate on how many voters were disenfranchised?
We're gathering that data right now, but I will tell you our phones have blown up. They started blowing up actually during the early voting, and we're tracking that. But we know, for example, that we can prove that 2 of those 19, now 23 polls that we have had reported to us, that there was a total of 350 voters that walked away. Well, imagine if we're running out of paper, we had 782 polls. Imagine how many people were turned away. Now, are they going to take the time to try to go find another poll? It's late at night, it's 6:30, they probably are rushing around to try to get home. They're trying to do their civic duty and go out and vote. Something that, as Senator Betancourt mentioned, our legal counsel, Andy Taylor, mentioned, our country is based upon being able to have fair, secure elections. We have had men and women from the beginning of our country fight for that opportunity. So I would estimate, at this point it's hard to estimate, because again we're continuing to get emails, phone calls telling us what went on. But I'll also point out that in terms of trying to reach out to the election administrator's office, we had election judges that called and called and called. We had them put on hold for 45 minutes. They would get disconnected after sitting there 2 or 3 times. We had a Democrat precinct where they actually delivered paper in the afternoon around 2, and 2 big boxes, and they didn't even ask for it. Why does the Republican Party have to ask for it? That should have been a normal process that we could depend upon. Yeah.
You're saying it shouldn't be a partisan issue. You're saying that Republicans and Democrats should be involved in this. But you've also pointed out the fact that these areas, 23 of them were voting strongly. So do you think this was intentional at all?
Based upon our data, it looks like there is a pattern here. That started, quite frankly, before we even got to early voting. We had situations where we were trying to get historical polls placed, and we were told, some of them were right here in the Spring Branch ISD area, we were told that they were not available. When Senator Betancourt's office, at our bequest, reached out to the Spring Branch ISD superintendent, they were told they were never asked. So I have to question, why does it appear, in this day and age that everyone wants to talk about voter suppression, why does it appear that it's directed in Republican strongholds?
One thing I can actually say, the reconciliation document that was signed by the Democrat-appointed elected presiding judge has a net negative 6,406. Okay, so that means it has more ballots than voters. So I know I have an election regularity, absolutely, because the PJ of the presiding judge signed it. Now apparently he's resigned, and so this issue, as the counselor has said, is going to be investigated until it's run to the ground. But right now, on a reconciliation document, we've got negative 6,460 votes, ballots more than we have voters. Sure.
I want to expand on your question, because the premise of your question was, how many folks do you think were disenfranchised? I want to explain from an election point of view that being disenfranchised has many different types of faces. The most obvious one is when you're turned away from the poll. And if you run the math, if there were 350 people turned away from the poll, not allowed to vote, and you have 782 locations, it's not a leap of logic to believe that we're going to be in the tens of thousands of people who are wrongfully turned away. But that's only category 1. Let me give you a couple of other categories. So one of the most troubling things we learned during the early voting process is how they were handling problem ballots. Let me explain. After you vote, it's a 2-page document. You scan in page 1, and that was working okay. The problem came in is when you tried to scan page 2. For a variety of reasons, page 2 would not scan. What the election code requires is you take that failed page 2 scan and you put it in something that's called an emergency chute. And then Central Count will look at that page and try to resurrect it. They have better scanners, And if they can read it but can't scan it, they can actually, with people watching, Democrats and Republicans observing, they can actually duplicate the ballot and scan it in so that that voter's vote counts and nobody's disenfranchised. Let me tell you what they did instead. Instead, they took that failed second ballot, and then they would give the voter a brand new access code and let them vote a second time. And then that first page and second page would then go into the scanner, and guess what? Now we've got page 1 scanned in once, page 2 on a new ballot scanned in once, but page 1 on the new ballot has been scanned in twice. So now we've got a double vote in the count, and that happened thousands of times. So you can also be disenfranchised and have your vote diluted because somebody was allowed to vote more than once. So that's just a simple example of how you add them all up together. Last thing, we have already been told that as far as provisionals go during early voting, that number is approximately 2021. I'm not talking about a calendar year. The actual number, 2021. We've been told that there are an excess of 2,000 votes that were done provisionally before 7. Now I'm up to over 4,000. But we've been told there's another 2,000 plus votes that were done after 7. Now we're over 6,000. So when you talk about all of this added together, when I'm done with my investigation, I bet you it's going to be not thousands, but tens of thousands of people were disenfranchised. And that's why you cannot ascertain the true outcome of this race.
Well, hold on. And one thing to add, and Cindy can expand on this, these are just calls that she's taken. How many calls have gone into the Democrat Party or somewhere else? We have no idea. Right.
And I will add, just since we started, you asked that question, our phones were blowing up with texts saying, hey, we had a problem at our polls. So we suspect that it was a lot more than 23 polls.
So bottom line is, the number is large enough that there's been a consequence to these elections.
Yeah, I mean, there are some close elections, but, you know, in the end, we should all be concerned. You know, the fact that you can't trust that your ballot's going to be recorded, you can't trust that you're going to have paper to record your ballot, you're a mom or a dad out there or a young person that's wanting to go vote and exercise their right, whatever party, you should be able to rely upon the county to run a fair and secure election. You should be able to rely upon the county to do their job. And when are we going to say that we're tired of it? This has gone on since, I mean, it started in 2020, but here we are. We saw what happened with the primary. We saw what happened May 24th. May 7th, we were hearing reports. That was a small election. We were hearing reports that they were telling one of the judges, it was late, they shut down, go ahead and take the ballots on home. Really? You're going to take ballots home for the night? Leave them in your car? Hope that maybe no one, with all the crime going on, that no one busts in and steals them? And then we have November 8th. This is ridiculous. You all deserve something better. This is a basic right that we all have and should be able to rely upon. Other questions?
I guess my question
Yeah.
is, what are y'all waiting for? If all of these are your concerns, what are y'all waiting for before passing that law?
Well, at this point, we're waiting for them to actually finish the election process.
Have you all been in contact with election monitors for the city council?
Yes, do you want to talk about that, election monitors? You're talking Secretary of State and the AG, yes. We've had conversations with them. They're aware that this is a serious issue. And, you know, a lot was made of the fact that the Secretary of State was sending in people, which has been in the law, to be observers since I think the mid-'80s, 90s. And everyone was like, oh, voter suppression. Well, maybe there's a reason they should have been here. Maybe there's a reason that they should be here monitoring what's going on, because Harris County just doesn't seem to be able to get the job done and get it done right. Was that?
If I could.
Yeah.
Right. The election monitors reports are being written. Those will be available. I already know that the a Secretary of State's office will give those out if people request when they're finished. Yes, fortunately, the state of Texas had election monitors here and in other major counties, like they do every election, and any help to watch for election irregularities or best practice issues is always welcome, because really all this is sunshine and transparency. That's all this is. But without it, we have more questions than we have answers.
Jen?
No one should be turned away from the polls ever, but given that we do have countywide polling, people don't have to vote at one specific location. Did you hear any reports of anyone getting turned away and then going, okay, I'll go to a different location and cast my ballot there?
Well, did you want to answer?
I know of a specific case where a gentleman went to 4 polls, turned away 3 times because at the start of the election couldn't find a place open, actually ended up voting at Presbyterian Pines. So the problem is not every voter will be able to do that. A mom with a special needs child can't go pick up, she has to make that appointment. And the problem is that and I've seen people about these closed polls, when they're totally closed and somebody's saying they're out of ballots, they turn around and they're not coming back. And that is voter suppression.
So I'd like to add one other thing to that. The other thing is that the county has a website on harrisvotes.com where you're supposed to be able to look at the poll, which I mean, it's a great idea, but we were hearing that polls were not open, and as a matter of fact, they went in and got an extension of time. But if you looked at it that morning, it showed everything was green, which meant all polls, 782, were open. It additionally said, oh, you have 0 people in line, and you have like a 0 to 15-minute wait. How many times does someone have to go to another poll and they give up? Other questions?
The information wasn't correct on the tracker for hours. Yes, sir?
I just want to know the 6,409 number. You listed a lot of issues with the voting process this time, but who can you specifically tie that number to?
Okay, that's the reconciliation report, and it's the sum of, it's actually a subtraction equation that starts with voters. Then it segregates out provisional ballots and mail ballots that are being worked on, and then it subtracts the amount of ballots. And when it's negative, it means there's 6,409 more ballots than voters.
Correct. Yeah, I guess I meant to ask, what can you attribute that discrepancy to? Why do you think that has happened?
Well, see, that's the problem, because the presiding judge signed the report. There's no counter signature from the Republicans. We don't know, okay? And I can only guess, but I know I've got an election regularity right now where I've got more ballots than I got voters. Okay. Well, and we know that.
And I will point out that report was used in the primary, and you remember we found 10,000 missing mail-in ballots. That's why that report is there. And that came through, I believe, Senate Bill 1.
That's Senate Bill 1. That's the voter integrity bill. That was actually something that I insisted be in the bill, is that we have a reconciliation document so we know what that is. But here's the problem. If nobody's there to talk about it, and it's posted online, we have to assume that it's the final report, because that's what the office said, that they had finalized all the counting. And it's a mess, because there's no election administrator worth their salt that wouldn't be trying to find out why they had a problem with 6,409 votes, because that's a big problem. And that's well more than between both political parties on the margin of victory at this, or loss at this time.
I think you'd have to check with them. I mean, I had heard, again, we've been pretty busy here, and I've heard that some of them, 1 or 2 of them did. But again, that was assuming that everything was running right. If I were a candidate that has spent the whole last year or 2 fighting hard to get elected out there day in, day out, I'd be really concerned. And I don't care, again, what party you're from.
Technical point on that if you want to.
So your question brings up something called an election contest. And I'm going to explain that because it might be helpful to you. So candidates who are defeated by a narrow margin of votes have the statutory right to file a lawsuit and contest the election. There's one of two outcomes. Either if they're successful with the evidence, they get seated, so the winning candidate loses and the losing candidate wins, you actually get seated, or if you can't ascertain the true outcome of the vote, then there's a new election. Now, it's not up and down the ballot. It's only for that specific candidate. When a candidate in the political court of public opinion concedes, that doesn't change legally their entitlement to file a statutory election contest.
So, Mr. Taylor, would you be advising any of the three GOP candidates for Commissioner's Court to reconsider?
Well, I represent the Harris County Republican Party. I don't represent any candidates up or down. I will just tell you, being an election lawyer, I've never seen an election like this that is more susceptible to reversal and the granting of a new election than this one. And I've been doing this 35 years.
Earlier today, we were trying to observe the hearing in the Freeburg Court, but the judge wouldn't allow us to do this public hearing. We all have to allow it.
I'm going to let our legal counsel address that.
I asked that specific question this afternoon, and the judge said that she's physically located in the courtroom. The courthouse and the courtroom doors of her courtroom are open, and if anybody wants to come in person to appear, they can. That was the answer she gave when I asked why the live stream was turned off.
So at 8 o'clock tonight, you should be able to go in the court.
I can't answer for the court.
So I want to thank you all for coming, and unfortunately, this is probably not going to be the last one. We are going to be fighting this. We're going to be taking every tool in our toolbox to ensure that this doesn't happen again. I know I said it 8 months ago, but I am really ticked off, and you guys should be too. This is ridiculous. It's time to put a stop to it. They need to get it right. This is an embarrassment to Harris County, and it suppresses every person's right to vote. Thank you all.